1 year after his defeat at the hands of the Dream Warriors, the Dream Demon of Springwood, Freddy Krueger, returns to finish his revenge against the final children of Elm Street. After dispatching the last 3 Dream Warriors, Freddy sets his sights on a new generation of teens, though standing in his way is Alice Thompson, the best friend to fallen Dream Warrior Kristen Parker. As Alice's best friends begin to fall to Freddy's blades, she finds herself absorbing their own dream powers, implying that Alice may be in fact the mythical Dream Master, the guardian of good dreams and the only one who can defeat Freddy and finally release the souls of his tormented victims. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master is the 4th installment of the Elm Street franchise, and the second film in the franchise to be produced without the series' creator, Wes Craven. Released on August 19, 1988, against a budget of $6.5 million, the film debuted at number 1 at the box office, eventually grossing almost $50 million, which would end up being the most successful slasher film of the 80s and the highest of the series at the time. Following the massive success of 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors, Freddy Krueger and the Elm Street franchise, along with Studio New Line Cinema, were on top of the horror genre. The film, which had grossed over $44 million domestically, was the most successful slasher film since the original Halloween, and had launched Freddy Krueger as a pop culture phenomenon. So of course, the studio was eager to cash in on the slasher boom with another sequel. The fire was still hot for the genre, but it was beginning to cool by 1988. In just that year alone, major franchises such as Halloween, Poltergeist, Friday the 13th, Phantasm, and Hellraiser, among others, would have sequels competing at the box office, while future icon Chucky would make his debut in that year's Child's Play. Prior to the start of production, Wes Craven had been approached by New Line producers, as they always did, to see if he would have any ideas for the next installment. They quickly scoffed at his ideas, however, which included time travel through dreams. Producer and New Line founder Robert Shea was eager to find the best, freshest, but most importantly, cheapest director they could find to direct the next installment for the House of Freddy built, while they heard pitch after pitch from various screenwriters. All the while, the studio had already dated the film for a release less than a year after Dream Warriors. Production had already began, and even more baffling, shooting had started without a finished script or director. Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives director Tom McLaughlin approached the studio to direct the film, having been a big fan of the series at that point, though relations quickly soured when the studio denied Tom creative control, something that he had secured during Jason Lives. After visiting New Line offices and making a nuisance of himself in the process, up-and-comer Renny Harlin was chosen as the film's director. Harlin had made a few low-budget pictures beforehand, most notably the horror film Prison, starring Jason Voorhees actor Kane Hodder. Producer Rachel Talalay thought that his European sensibility worked well with the fantastical nature of the Elm Street series, though he would initially clash with the producer Robert Shea, who favored himself a more hands-on producer. The two's fights on and off set would become infamous amongst the crew, and Harlin himself noted that he'd be instantly anxious whenever Bob Shea would show up on set. Shea, who had become skeptical after hiring Harlin, was later impressed with the dailies coming from the shoot and would eventually defer to Harlin's direction going forward. The two would work out their differences and were on quite friendly terms by the time of the film's release. Harlin would later go on to direct genre films such as the popular Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, Deep Blue Sea, and Cutthroat Island. Credit for the screenplay would go to Ken and Jim Wheat alongside Brian Englund, whose screenplay for LA Confidential would later earn him an Oscar. Though Englund noted that his script was completed in only 9 days due to a looming Writers Guild strike, and producer Rachel Talalay, who had been with the series since the first installment, notes that herself, Robert Shea, and director Renny Harlin were all involved in the writing process after the strike had commenced. The general concept for Nightmare 4 was to feature Freddy targeting the final children of Elm Street to complete his revenge, while building up the character of Alice as the Dream Master. The producers felt that this was a natural extension of the Dream Warriors concept, while also giving Freddy Krueger a worthy adversary for the first time, and a new main character that could carry the franchise forward. Returning Dream Warrior actors Ken Sagos and Rodney Eastman reprised their characters as Kincaid and Joey respectively, though both lamented the replacement of Kristen Parker actress Patricia Arquette with Tuesday Night. Eastman and Sagos noted it was difficult to retain their characters' chemistry with Kristen, as they had not acted alongside Night before, and expressed their desire to see what Nightmare on Elm Street 4 could have been had Arquette reprised her role. Arquette's departure from the franchise was the topic of much debate over the years, with rumors of conflicting schedules, disputes over payment. There was even speculation that Patricia's pregnancy had caused her to drop out. Arquette herself would eventually set the record straight in an interview in 2017, where she stated that she left the series to pursue more dramatic roles and better opportunities to advance as an actress. I can certainly see her perspective, as horror was still viewed harshly upon by critics during this time, and it's only recently that it has become much more mainstream. Patricia herself even stated that she was still a fan of horror and the franchise, and is still proud to have been a part of its history. In place of Arquette as Kristen Parker was Tuesday Night, then a rising pop star. Night received some backlash from audiences initially, but has found a niche of her own within the fandom, partially driven by her career in music, which also includes the opening theme song for the film, titled Nightmare. Night herself noted that she was not even informed until the film's premiere that her song would be used as the opening theme, and despite not being officially released as a single for many years, the track remained popular with fans and has had a surge in popularity along with Night's other music, as the popularity of synthwave has risen. Franchise veteran Robert Englund returned for the fourth time as the iconic boogeyman Freddy Krueger, and taking center stage with star billing for the first time in the series. Englund himself was reportedly unsure of the project and the tone that the director was going in at first. It wasn't until the cast and crew were shown some dailies and the film was described as the MTV nightmare, in which suddenly everything clicked and Robert Englund became overly enthusiastic for the film. He has since called it his favorite of the Elm Street sequels. For the role of Alice, Kristen's best friend and our new de facto protagonist, over 600 actresses are reported to have auditioned for the part. Halloween 4 actress Ellie Cornell has reported that she was up for the lead in this film, though whether or not it was for this role or the role of Kristen is unknown. Lisa Wilcox, who would eventually win the role, was initially passed up for being too pretty. Wilcox grunged herself down though and impressed producers with her audition and secured the role. Wilcox would later reprise her role for the following sequel, Dream Child, and she herself has become incredibly popular within the series and often ranks amongst the best final girls. The character of Alice is also noted as being one of the only main characters to survive multiple Elm Street sequels and make it out alive. The remaining cast consist of Kristen and Alice's friend group. Alice's brother and Kristen's boyfriend Rick is played by Andrus Jones, while Rick's friend and Alice's crush Dan is played by Danny Hassel. Brooke Thies, who starred alongside Heather Langenkamp in Just the 10 of Us, plays Debbie, Alice's weightlifting germophobic friend, and rounding out the cast is Toy Newkirk, who plays Sheila, the asthmatic and kindly nerd of our crop of cannon fodder. Characters. Reportedly during filming, Newkirk was asked by Harlin to redub her lines because she, quote, didn't sound black enough, unquote. Please forgive me for even having said that. This understandably led to some hostility between the two, which cooled off when the film was released and Newkirk's performance was praised by critics, by then which Harlin admitted that he was wrong. The loose and changing screenplay often meant scenes would be improvised on set, and the actors themselves rewrote much of their own dialogue. The special effects heavy production also meant long, grueling hours, sometimes spent in tanks or in dark and wet sets, though the crew and cast took note of the enthusiasm and sheer creativity that the film shoot had brought out of the special effects team. By the late 80s, audiences had been conditioned to be thrilled and to cheer for the killers in their respective slasher films, not to be scared by them. Producer Rachel Talalay was well aware of this and planned accordingly. Putting Freddy front and center and focusing less on pure horror was the only way to really evolve the series and change with the times, and the added dark comedy and the increasingly fantastical tone were evident of this change. And despite the troubled production, the film would make its expedited release date of August 19th, 1988. And once those iconic titles started playing, it was only then that Freddy's dominance of the horror genre truly began. The movie begins with Tuesday Night's now iconic synth-pop classic, Nightmare, accompanied by the obligatory literary dream quotes that the series is famous for. A child begins drawing on the sidewalk with colored chalk, and is eventually revealed to be the infamous Elm Street house. The song then fades into the classic Elm Street theme before Tuesday night, introduced for the first time as Kristen, greets the young girl who drew the house. Both are standing outside of the actual Elm Street house, looking just as crusty and decrepit as ever. Rain forces Kristen inside, where its ghoulish visage eventually terrifies her into summoning fellow Dream Warriors Kincaid and Joey. It's revealed to have been over a year since Freddy's demise in Dream Warriors, and the three have since returned to their normal lives in Springwood. Joey and Kincaid are more than a little annoyed at Kristen for interrupting their sleep, though Kristen is sure that Krueger is still alive and waiting for them. Joey tries to convince Kristen by showing her the cold boiler where Freddy used to take his victims, though their dream is interrupted by Kincaid's dog Jason, who leaves a nasty bite mark on Kristen's arm. The next day, Kristen goes to pick up her boyfriend/wannabe martial artist Rick Johnson and his sister, the mousy and kind-hearted Alice. The Johnson siblings are eager to get away from their alcoholic father Dennis, whose drunken verbal abuse is especially toxic on avoid-all-contact days. At school, we meet the rest of the gang and are clumsily introduced to the character traits that will make up the entirety of their dialogue, personality, and deaths. Alice, a frequent daydreamer, has the hots for Rick's hunky friend Dan, but is too shy and mousy to really say anything about it. While nearby, Debbie and Sheila throw some shade at the misogynistic jocks of Springwood High. Joey and Kincaid confront Kristen yet again, telling her that her fear of his return could bring Krueger back, fears which ring true as ominous signs of Freddy's return begin sprouting up. That night, as Alice and Rick console each other over their father's latest drunken tirade, Kincaid falls asleep and is transported to the car wreckage lot from the finale of Dream Warriors. Krueger is then resurrected in a comical and overly dramatic fashion, with a little help from Kincaid's dog Jason. This effect is achieved by using a classic old-school trick of melting down wax and clay, then simply playing the footage in reverse. Krueger quickly dispatches Kincaid after a quick fight between the two, though Kincaid promises to see him in hell. Up next on the chopping block is Joey, drowned in an admittedly impressive waterbed sequence, no doubt a callback to Johnny Depp's famous death from the original. You know, it's a shame that we don't get to see the Dream Warriors use their powers against Freddy in any meaningful way outside of Kristen. Eastman and Sagos were reportedly unhappy with their swift and brutal demise at the hands of Freddy so early on in the film, with Eastman even calling it a cheap trick. At school the next day, Kristen is nervous after not seeing Kincaid or Joey show up. Alice tries to reassure her and tells her about the Dream Master rhyme, reminding her to retain control in the dream world by dreaming about someplace fun. In class, Kristen realizes that Joey and Kincaid have been taken by Freddy and knocks herself out cold in the process. Seriously, Kristen, what the hell? We're then treated to something that most of us never thought that we'd see in an Elm Street film: Robert Englund in drag, before the school nurse rescues Kristen from Freddy's clutches. We meet up with the rest of the gang at a local hotspot named the Craven, of course named after series creator Wes Craven. We're treated to some more dialogue setting up character traits from our group of would-be victims, friends, until Kristen takes everyone to the now infamous Elm Street house. Here we get our obligatory exposition dump that gets new kid on the block Dan up to speed on Springwood's twisted and violent vigilante past. Kristen's mother, played by Brooke Bundy, reprising her role from Dream Warriors, orders Kristen away from the house and the group disperses. At home, Kristen's mother grills her tormented daughter over dinner about her recent lack of sleep, and Kristen discovers that she's been drugged with sleeping pills. In an excellent and well-choreographed scene, Kristen tries to call for help as she succumbs to the drug's effects, but not before remembering Alice's words of advice. In the dream, Kristen awakens to find herself on a beach, complete with a stylish bikini and skirt. She relishes in this small moment of comfort, but it is short-lived. Another creepy little girl, this one also named Alice, heralds the arrival of Freddy, who invades Kristen's dream and, in typical Freddy style, forces Kristen out of her happy place and back into that nightmarish Elm Street house. In the basement, Freddy teases Kristen as Elm Street's last brat, and tries to goad her into summoning one of her friends so that his killing spree can continue. Kristen tries to keep Freddy at bay, but his torment proves to be too much, and she accidentally summons Alice into her dream. Alice, unaware of Freddy and completely confused, can only watch on horrified as Kristen throws herself in front of Freddy to save her friend. Freddy then tosses Kristen into his boiler, adding her to his grotesque chest of souls, but not before Kristen transfers her X-Men power, dream power, to Alice. Alice awakens from the dream and sees a grim message from Freddy and Kristen in her mirror. Alice looks and sees her reflection for the first time, noticing that she's already looking different, somehow more put together and confident. Remembering the dream, Alice and Rick race to Kristen's house, But the duo and Kristen's mother are too late, as she is found burning alive in her bed. And with Kristen's death, so goes the last of the Dream Warriors and the last child of Elm Street. The death of Kristen Parker, as well as the other Dream Warriors so early on into the film, is still controversial with fans to this day. In defense of the film, though, it is a common trope of the slasher genre, and this series in particular, while also harkening back to the original 1984 Elm Street and how it set up Tina as the false protagonist before killing her off 20 minutes in, and then setting Nancy up as the real protagonist from there. Still, some fans and even the actors themselves had desired to see more of their characters in the sequel, and they reportedly told their friends and family not to be late to the movie theater or else they would miss all of their scenes. And to make matters worse, this particular creative choice was apparently made at the insistence of New Line Cinema, who wanted to keep the series fresh and establish Alice as the Dream Master, even though some thought it made far more sense for it to be Kristen. Director Renny Harlin sought to use the character of Kristen more throughout filming, but was asked to kill her off as soon as possible to make way for Alice. There are several scenes from the original screenplay, as well as shot footage and deleted scenes that feature Kristen that were cut and have never seen the light of day, including an entire nightmare sequence that would have occurred just after the deaths of Joey and Kincaid. And, as if things couldn't possibly get any messier, rumors of a romantic fling between Knight and Harlin isolated Knight further from the rest of the cast, who felt that Harlin was lavishing attention upon Kristen at the expense of the other Dream Warriors. And to be fair to the other cast members, Kristen does show up quite a bit after her death, with little scenes and appearances sprinkled all throughout the film, though you don't really see any of this with Joey or Kincaid. I get that Alice wasn't really friends with the other Dream Warriors, and I understand the logic and creative choice in killing off the old cast so Freddy can terrorize a new generation. It just all feels a little rushed, and had it not been for the chaotic production and writer's strike, I feel a more solid and polished screenplay would have come about that could have provided a better send-off for the Dream Warriors. Nightmare 4 has certainly earned its well-deserved status as the MTV nightmare. By the late 80s, MTV and the music industry had completely taken over pop culture, and movie soundtracks were more popular than they had ever been. With New Line Cinema's previous collaboration with Dokken and Dream Warriors proving to be a huge success with the fanbase, the studio went even further with the musical tie-ins for the promotion and marketing for Dream Master. In addition to the aforementioned song from Tuesday Night, the movie's accompanying soundtrack featured an all-star roster of talent from many artists including Billy Idol, Blondie, The Divinyls, and Sinead O'Connor, whose track I Want Your Hands on Me is used twice throughout the film. Producer Rachel Talalay noted that this track in particular was expensive to get a hold of due to O'Connor's rising popularity, but Bob Shea was determined to get the song and ended up paying the fee. One of the more interesting musical collaborations for the film was with the Fat Boys, whose song Are You Ready for Freddy features actual rapped vocals from Robert Englund himself. The song's accompanying music video also features Englund as Krueger, as well as the iconic Elm Street house, and it was popular on MTV, of course. The song wasn't featured on the film's soundtrack, though it was included on the group's studio album Coming Back Hard Again, as well as during the film's end credits. The film's original score is composed by Craig Safran, whose work is often singled out as some of the best original music composed for the series. His work is often blended with the original Charles Bernstein score, which helps maintain continuity with the other films in the series, and Safran's new themes, such as The Final Fight and his reinterpretations of the classic Elm Street theme, are the standout tracks for me. The music and soundtrack are almost singularly important in creating this film's unique style and tone, combined with Renny Harlin's wild and creative direction. The visuals and musical accompaniment were huge factors in driving this movie's popularity with audiences and are central to its enduring legacy. The second act begins with Alice and Rick looking at old video footage of Kristen and the rest of the gang, reminiscing over their now dead friend. Alice, though, still remembers her dream and the monster that took Kristen's life, and she now feels a part of Kristen with her and even begins to adopt some of her habits, such as smoking and even quoting some of her lines when she's seen talking with Sheila in the bathroom before class the next day. As the girls begin taking their test, Alice begins to daydream when suddenly Sheila appears inside of the dream as well. Out of nowhere, Freddy begins to toy with Sheila, first by using a robotic hand to grab her before revealing himself to the pair. In a scene lacking the broad comedy that pervades much of the rest of the film, Freddy slowly walks over to Sheila, getting uncomfortably close, stroking the terrified girl's face, and showing us just how vile of a monster he really is. Without missing a beat, Freddy grabs Sheila and sucks all of the air out of her body, deflating her like a balloon. This scene remains one of the most mean-spirited and senseless of Freddy's kills, and driving this home even further is Sheila's placement as the first of the new crop of kids to be killed by Freddy Krueger. And Alice can only watch on horrified as her friend dies of a fatal asthma attack in the real world. As Sheila's body is taken away, the reality of the situation begins to dawn on Alice, and she runs away in tears, feeling guilty for having drugged Sheila into her dream. Rick chases after her just as he too begins to understand the extent of Freddy's powers. At the diner, Dan meets with Alice and the two have a talk about why Freddy is after Alice now that the Elm Street kids are all dead. Alice theorizes that Freddy could only invade the dreams of the children of those who had burned him alive. Because Kristen has given Alice her powers, she now has a link to Freddy and is thus being used as a conduit for Freddy to lure in more victims. The next day, Alice falls asleep again during class, this one being taught by producer Bob Shea in his obligatory cameo. Rick gets pulled into Alice's dream when he falls asleep in the bathroom, and Freddy begins his torment of Rick, first as the burned visage of Kristen. An invisible Freddy begins to fight Rick, who starts to gain the upper hand after landing a few blows. When Rick kicks off Freddy's glove, he thinks he's finally won, but Freddy's glove takes aim and lands squarely in Rick's gut. Alice senses her brother's death and screams in anguish, causing the windows in the classroom to shatter. In what has become a grim ritual for the Elm Street series, Alice and the survivors attend Rick's funeral, where Alice daydreams that Rick has faked his death and leaps out of the casket. The scene is played for laughs and tears at the same time, and I don't think it quite lands the right mixture between those two, but the emotion of the scene is still felt pretty strongly, and that's mostly due to the strength of Lisa Wilcox's performance. Dan and Debbie make plans to meet up with Alice later, with Debbie noticing the drastic change in Alice's personality, which Dan notes to have occurred with each murder. That night, Alice prepares to leave, but is intercepted by her father, now drowning his sorrows with more booze as usual. Dennis, though, is understandably concerned for Alice's well-being, and is now afraid of losing her as well. Alice promises to stay home to placate her father and goes back upstairs to her room. With Alice's mirror slowly becoming void of photos, her transformation is becoming more apparent. Spotting a pair of nunchucks that belong to Rick, Alice begins to display uncanny speed and precision with the weapon, surprising no one more than herself. By this point in the franchise, the special effects and visuals for the dream sequences had become highly acclaimed, and the production team for Dream Master strove to push the bar even further than they had done before, making good use of the film's small $6.5 million budget. According to the producers and crew, it was an all-star cast of designers and effects artists that made up the special effects team, which included famed makeup effects artist Kevin Yeager, who'd created the original Freddy Krueger makeup, this time passing on application duties to Howard Berger, whose resume within the horror genre is as equally impressive. This particular look of Freddy, including the hat, sweater, and glove, is probably the best looking of the series and my personal favorite. The late John Carl Buechler, who had just finished directing Friday the 13th Part 7, and had also just worked on reshoots for Halloween 4, was the film's chief special effects supervisor and has plenty of his handiwork showcased here, including the iconic Chest of Souls, Old Age Alice makeup, and the infamous Soul Food pizza. Wanting another rousing fight scene for the climax, producers thought of all the previous ways that they had killed off Freddy in an attempt to top themselves for Dream Master. Noting that all of Freddy's previous deaths came from an external force, it was suggested that an internal force should tear apart Freddy from the inside. Effects designer Steve Johnson designed a large chest that would allow the actors to simulate this effect, which when combined with the miniatures and other practical effects, were edited perfectly together for the finale. Scream Queen Linnea Quigley makes a cameo appearance as one of these souls, prominently sticking her bare chest out. Linnea would go on to marry Steve Johnson after having met him on the set of this film. If you want more information on the production of Dream Master or the rest of the Elm Street series, I would highly recommend checking out Daniel Ferenc's 2010 documentary, Never Sleep Again. It's a 4-hour-long commitment, but if you're an Elm Street mega fan, you're hardly going to even notice the time. The documentary covers each film in the series, with each film being covered for about 45 minutes. It's filled with stories from all of the cast and crew from each film, and is a must-have for any horror nerd's Blu-ray collection. Though the recollections of each film drive the documentary, the real treasures are the stories of New Line Cinema's rise as an independent studio, and its reputation as the house that Freddy built. The documentary is currently available for purchase on most online retailers, and is currently streaming on Shudder and YouTube. The final act begins with Alice making her way to the local movie theater and checking out some old school cinema. In one of the most iconic and inventive sequences of the series, Alice slowly begins to notice that things are not what they seem with the movie. The setting quickly changes to the Craven, now run down and in shambles. Then suddenly a powerful wind begins forcing everything towards the screen. First Alice's popcorn and soda, then Alice herself. This effect was achieved by using a set piece that was built to rotate, another hallmark of the series and a callback no doubt to the original Elm Street. Alice eventually slips away from the balcony and seamlessly into the movie screen, an effect that director Renny Harlin claims had never been done before. Now trapped in the nightmare, Alice looks back as the ghosts of her dead friends give her a round of applause before the doors slam shut. In the diner, Alice meets her own worst nightmare, a significantly older Alice still working as a waitress and wishing to leave. Freddy then appears to torment Alice further with a soul food pizza made up of the souls of the film's victims. This scene, while campy, manages to instill a remarkable amount of fear back into the character of Freddy, as he devours the meatball head representing Alice's brother Rick right in front of her. Before she can escape, Freddy uses Alice to bring him yet another soul, this time setting his sights on Debbie. Alice seemingly wakes up and runs to meet up with Dan to try to save their friend. Freddy begins his slow torment of Debbie, first appearing as she practices her bench pressing, which, judging by her poor form, could definitely use the extra work. Debbie tries using Nancy's "you're nothing" trick from the first movie, but it doesn't work this time. In a gruesome yet awesome practical effect, Freddy presses down on Freddy's arms until they snap like twigs, which then fall off to reveal a set of insect-like appendages. Meanwhile, Dan and Alice are kept in circles by Freddy, repeating a loop of picking Dan up from the diner, then dropping Alice off at Debbie's house. This sequence is Robert Englund's favorite of the entire franchise, noting it as a beautiful and creepy visual representation of a dream, and apparently was the brainchild of producer Bob Shea. It isn't until the fourth loop that Alice and Dan realize that they're both asleep and caught in the loop. It's too late for Debbie, though, who finds herself trapped in a roach motel, slowly transforming into a grotesque human-roach hybrid, all done by director/effects artist Screaming Mad George, whose work can be seen in genre films such as Poltergeist 2 and Big Trouble in Little China. Having prolonged Debbie's suffering long enough, Krueger finally claims her and crushes Debbie inside of the motel. Alice, having sensed Debbie's death and collected her dream power, sees Freddy in the road and attempts to run him down. This, of course, is revealed to be another dream, and Alice instead hits a tree. Dan is injured in the crash and rushed to a hospital to undergo surgery. Alice steals her father's keys and rushes back home to kickstart the single most epic musical montage of the series and probably of all slasher films. Alice suits up with the clothes and gadgets of her fallen friends as she removes the remaining photos and keepsakes from her mirror. Taking some sleeping pills, Alice falls asleep just as Dan is put under by the hospital staff and is greeted by Krueger in the dream. Alice literally crashes through in the nick of time to save Dan, and the two escape into a dark tunnel that Freddy begins to rotate like a demented carnival ride. Alice and Dan eventually crash through a stained glass window and into a medieval dream church, where Dan's injuries cause him to hemorrhage in the real world, prompting his doctors to bring him out of sedation. This leaves the newly christened Dream Master, Alice, to face the Dream Demon of Springwood all alone. The power of her fallen Dream Warriors gives Alice a significant boost, and she is able to keep Freddy at bay, but though she lands blow after blow, Krueger is never fazed by any of them. The souls of 1,000 children prove to be too much for Alice, and Freddy corners her after a long and drawn-out duel in the church. As Alice sits defeated, she gazes up to see the souls of the young school children normally seen singing Freddy's iconic nursery rhyme. They begin reciting the Dream Master rhyme that Alice had told Kristen about earlier, which then causes Alice to remember the rest. Using a piece of the shattered glass, Alice recites the rhyme to Freddy and forces him to see his own reflection for the very first time. This scene was inspired by classical artwork, namely a piece called The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, and is one of the most ambitious set pieces of the series thus far. After decades of suffering, the souls trapped within Freddy Krueger revolt and begin tearing their way out of him. Powerless to stop them, Freddy's skull is eventually pulled open, finally freeing the tormented souls of his trapped victims. The hundreds of children, including the fallen Dream Warriors and Alice's friends, ascend into heaven, thanking Alice for releasing them from their hellish prison. Alice then kicks Freddy's now discarded glove and leaves the church triumphant, having reached her full potential as the Dream Master. Sometime later, Dan and Alice, now recovered and making for a cute couple, visit a water fountain. Alice is revealed to still have trouble sleeping, so Dan asks her to make a wish. In typical horror movie fashion, Alice briefly sees the reflection of Krueger in the pond before it ripples away. Alice dismisses the vision though and leaves with her new boyfriend, both of them walking off into the sunset as Sinead O'Connor takes us into the end credits. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors had been a huge success upon its release, and it continues to be popular within the fanbase to this day. So the gauntlet was certainly thrown down for Dream Master to live up to its potential. The film's rushed and fraught production only increased the anxieties of the producers and director Renny Harlin the closer that they got to the release date, but all of these worries would be washed away when the film would finally hit theaters on August 19, 1988. Debuting at number 1 at the box office with $12 million, the film would eventually stay at number 1 for 3 weeks and finished its domestic run with $49.4 million, making it the most successful film in the series up to that point, as well as the highest grossing slasher film of the decade. It remains the highest grossing of the original Elm Street films. Critically, the film was praised as an entertaining and over-the-top thrill ride, though it was seen by many as a downgrade from Dream Warriors. Some critics decried the series' increasingly deeper turn into self-referential humor, and the focus on surreal dream imagery over a solid screenplay and actual scares, while others lamented Freddy's slow transformation from terrifying boogeyman into pop culture icon. Most critics, however, praised Renny Harlin's direction, the bizarre and creative dream sequences, the film's music, as well as singling out Robert Englund and Lisa Wilcox's performances. Harlin has stated that his first phone call following the film's success at the box office was from Steven Spielberg, and even Wes Craven himself, who has notoriously not minced words when it comes to the Elm Street sequels, praised Renny Harlin's direction and felt that he brought something fresh and original to the series. Audiences and fans remain just as mixed on the film as critics are, but it remains a fan favorite of the series and maintains average to pretty high scores on most online sites and forums. Fans tend to single out the music and kills as some of the best in the series, and many just enjoy the film's relentlessly fun and entertaining tone. It's either seen as the beginning of Freddy's decline, or the last great Elm Street sequel before the series would officially jump the shark. And generally speaking, the franchise would only suffer from here on out, as the next film in the series, Dream Child, would not only become the worst reviewed of the series, but would also become the lowest grossing of the series up to that point. Outside of the films, Krueger's exposure within pop culture by this point was reaching its absolute height, and the cast and crew noted that Englund relished in the opportunity to ham it up on and off screen. And such marketing gimmicks included a 1-800-Freddy Krueger hotline, multiple endorsement deals, cameos in music videos, his own spoken word album, and eventually a spin-off anthology television series in which Freddy Krueger would act as the host. Having dominated the box office and outmatched all of the competition with Dream Master, Freddy Krueger and the Elm Street franchise completed their takeover of horror and ended the decade as the slasher icon of the genre. I can't remember exactly when I watched A Nightmare on Elm Street 4 The Dream Master for the first time. When I finally got around to viewing the Elm Street series, I was already headfirst into my slasher horror deep dive, having already ran through Halloween, Friday the 13th, Scream, and Child's Play before even making my way down Elm Street. I was a huge computer nerd too at the time, still am, and had done plenty of research on the series and had seen plenty of screenshots from the film before I actually watched it for the first time. I think the first time I watched it was on TV, the Sci-Fi Channel to be exact, and it was airing as a part of a marathon of the series. I would eventually buy the movie myself and have watched it a number of times since. And each time I watch it, I tend to like it more than I did the time before. The film just has a visual style and tone wholly unique to the franchise, and the holes in the story are largely forgiven due to the acting performances and the love that everyone on set had for the franchise. Freddy Krueger makes quite the impression here, as well as the new crop of characters who, while emblematic of the usual slasher fodder, make for some worthy adversaries to the Springwood slasher. Fans, however, remain divided on this film to this day, as it represents a complete shift away from pure horror and more focus on dark comedy and trippy visuals, though both of these have been present to an extent from the very beginning of the series. The Dream Master also showcases New Line Cinema's full embrace of pop culture and MTV, not only as a means of promotion, but by infusing the film itself with that same manic energy and style. They created the perfect formula that truly captured the era in which it was made. Dream Master is big, bold, loud, and much like the 80s, excessive to an almost gargantuan degree. The producers have admitted that the film's rushed production, coupled with the writer's strike, led to massive plot holes that dot the script. The recasting of Kristen along with the swift demise of the Dream Warriors are also frequently criticized by fans to this day, and the series was never able to quite recapture that same lightning in the bottle that they did with Dream Master. The franchise would slide ever further into self-parody and bizarre twists just to keep the series going, and while Wes Craven would return in 1994 with the well-received New Nightmare, that film was more of a love letter to the series and the fans, and the legacy that he created with Freddy Krueger. The last real bit of success from the franchise would come in 2003 with the highly anticipated Freddy vs. Jason. That film, while receiving mixed reviews, was the highest grossing film in either franchise until 2010, when it was surpassed by the Platinum Dunes remake. That film, though, was a critical flop, and despite making over $110 million globally, there was little interest in a sequel, and the series has sat quietly by ever since. As it stands now, the Dream Master represents Freddy Krueger and the Elm Street series at the absolute height of their popularity. Its hip-hop and synthwave-infused soundtrack, along with Renny Harlin's youthful and creative direction, tapped into the zeitgeist and forever ingrained the dream demon of Springwood into the culture of the 1980s. From here on out, there was no escaping Freddy Krueger or the Elm Street series, and up to this point, each film had done better than the one before it. Perhaps there was nowhere for the series to go but down, but the success of the Dream Master had far-reaching effects outside of just the Elm Street franchise. New Line Cinema, famous as the house that Freddy built, had already risen so much in the few short years since the first Elm Street film. The company was becoming much more financially secure and was making big waves as an independent studio. A Nightmare 4 would only raise the company's stature even further, as it would become the highest grossing independent movie of all time until the release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was also produced by New Line Cinema. Producer Bob Shea and his Maverick company would continue to make strides in the industry, eventually partnering with Time Warner and AT&T, producing the highly successful Lord of the Rings franchise. Current franchises produced under the New Line banner include the Conjuring universe and several films in the DCEU. The film would also prove to be the breakthrough that director Renny Harlin had been hoping for. Within a year of Dream Master's release, Harlin had already signed on to direct Die Hard 2. To this date, his films have earned over $1.2 billion at the global box office, putting him in the top 150 highest grossing directors of all time. And so in my unqualified opinion, I think that the reception to this film, while still leaning more on the positive side, is a tad overblown. If Dream Master suffers from anything, it's from its close proximity to the fan favorite Dream Warriors. I think had Dream Master provided a better send-off for the surviving characters from Dream Warriors, then this film would sit much higher with fans and may even be seen as the definitive Nightmare film. Nothing will ever surpass the freshness of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven's iconic boogeyman gave audiences a whole new reason to stay awake. Freddy wasn't just some hillbilly cannibal or mindless undead slasher. He tormented his victims in the place that it hurt most, the one place that they could never escape. And sooner or later, you have to go to sleep. And on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger would always be waiting for you once you did. And Dream Master took Wes Craven's original concepts to their ultimate extreme, testing the limits of just how bizarre and demented Krueger's killing spree could get. It may lose points for bending the rules and at times outright rewriting them, and Freddy's dark side continues to slide into the background as his zany antics and one-liners take center stage, but these criticisms often overshadow some poignant themes and subtle details that thoroughly flesh out the universe of the Elm Street franchise, while leveling the playing field and giving Freddy Krueger someone who could challenge him in the dream world. And this certainly isn't a case of me wearing my nostalgia goggles on too tight, because I didn't grow up on the Elm Street series, and I didn't even get around to watching Dream Master until later. It was actually one of the last films in the series that I watched, having watched Dream Child and most of the other later sequels beforehand. There was just something about Renny Harlin's flair for the dramatic and Lisa Wilcox's understated performance that struck a chord with me, and I wasn't the only one. There's a reason that this was the highest grossing movie of the series, and it wasn't until Freddy went toe-to-toe with Jason Voorhees that it was ever surpassed. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master showcased that audiences of the time were thirsty for more than your typical slice and dice, and they were handsomely rewarded with the most outrageous, brash, and excessive nightmare yet. Ever-diminishing returns would plague the series going forward, as it would most other slasher franchises of the time. And while the 2000s remake trend and the 80s nostalgia boom would provide a brief resurgence for the franchise, only time will tell if the series will ever reclaim its former glory and dominate the culture as it once did. The most recent Halloween reboots prove that it could be done with Michael Myers, so maybe, just maybe, if another talented director and writer get their hands on Freddy Krueger, then there will come a day when we all gather again for another trip down Elm Street.
It's Freddy. He's coming back for us.
Freddy is dead, buried and consecrated.
You better be careful. I'm telling you, he's coming back.
I am eternal. Elm Street's last breath. Farewell. Now no one sleeps. Dr. Seuss.
Alice! Alice!
Thank you again, as always, for joining me tonight. I hope you really enjoyed this retrospective on the Dream Master. I had a lot of fun making it for you guys. Please leave me your own stories and your opinions on the Elm Street series and any other films you would like to see me do a retrospective on. I'm really hoping to make these videos a fixture of my channel, so stay tuned for more. As always, please stay safe, take good care of yourselves, and don't forget to love each day. Take nothing for granted, and I will see you all again here real soon.
This